Okay, so myself, Manoranjan Kumar, and Assistant Professor in Agriculture Department of Suresh Gyan Bihar University. So today in this video lecture, we will discuss about the watershed management. Okay, so by the end of this lecture, the students will able to know the what is the watershed and what are its scope, and also the we will discuss about the objective of the watershed and classification of watershed. The watershed is classified in many types, so we will discuss all the types of watershed. Okay, so let us start with introduction. So first is the watershed. So what do you mean by the watershed? Watershed means watershed is one a catchment, one area in which the all the rainfall comes to a common point. That is called as the watershed. Okay. This watershed also called as the drainage basin or catchment area. Okay. So it is defined as an area in which all water flowing into it goes to a common point. Okay, so this is the watershed. So people and livestock are integral part of the watershed. In this watershed, the people is also will take advantage, as well as livestock will also take advantage. So these people and livestock are integral part of the watershed, and their activities affect the productivity status of watershed and vice versa. Okay, so watershed is not simply the hydrological unit, but it is also a social, political, ecological entity which plays a crucial role in determining the food, social and economical security, and also provide life support service to the rural people. Okay, so this is the watershed. Now we will discuss about the scope of the watershed. Why the watershed management is important? Why the watershed management is necessary? What are its scope? So, in a well-managed watershed, all the natural resources such as soil, okay, water, vegetation, these are the natural resources. So all these natural resources are conserved. Okay, in the well-managed watershed, all these natural resources, soil, water, and vegetation are conserved. So, if you talk about the vegetation, then this vegetation or plant play a vital role in conserving the natural resources of a watershed, such as soil and water. Okay. The underground component of the plants, such as the roots, spread within the soil and thereby stabilize and reinforce the soil. Okay. In this way, you can say it conserves the soil. Also, the water infiltrates below the ground through the voids in the soil as well as through the interface between the root surface and the soil. The terrestrial component of plants such as stem, branches and leaves, these prevent the soil below it from getting directly exposed to the sunlight as well as to the impact of the raindrop. Okay. Thus, in such a way, a significant part of the momentum and energy of the rainwater is absorbed, and thereby it inducing and accelerating the downward movement of the rainwater through a stem flow and infiltration. Okay. On one hand, this process creates water bodies like the groundwater reservoirs and rivers, which are good sources of water and nutrients required for the plant growth. On the other hand, this process also substantially reduces the soil erosion and the surface flow velocity of the storm. Okay. Also, there will be a release of ample amount of oxygen, generation of colorful and fragrant flowers, fresh leaves, as well as fruits through the process of photosynthesis. Okay, so this activity makes the entire watershed very pleasant for human beings, also for the migratory birds, flying insects, as well as all other animals. Okay, so the fruit and leaves also serve as food for human beings and animals. The watershed containing large amount of vegetation is considered as a healthy watershed. It is also called a well-managed or a green watershed. It has no soil erosion, or if very little soil erosion will take place. And also it has a large reserve of groundwater as well as surface water. So in general, it has most of its natural resources conserved. Okay. So thus you can say the scope of the watershed management involves all the actions and programs which aimed at achieving an overall balance between the utilization and conservation of natural resources in the watershed. It represents a sustainable approach for resource conservation through watershed management. Okay. Now, the watershed management. We have seen what is the watershed. Watershed means this is an area where all the mm, runoff water will collected at the same point. Okay. Now, watershed management. What do you mean by the watershed management? How you can manage the watershed? Okay. So, first, watershed management. This is the study of relevant characteristics of a watershed, which aimed at the sustainable distribution of its resources. Watershed management is an important aspect of creating and implementing plans, programs, and different projects to sustain and enhance the watershed functions that affect the plant, animal, and human communities within a watershed boundary. Okay, so that is known as the watershed management. Okay, now we will see what are the objectives of watershed management. So there are many objectives, different objectives are there. So first objective of this watershed management is to control damaging runoff and degradation and thereby conservation of soil and water. Okay. If the watershed is not well developed, then what happens? All the runoff water will not collect at the single point. Some runoff water will go in this way, some runoff water will go in that way. Okay, so there will be no proper conservation of water, and if there is no proper conservation of water, then at some places the soil erosion may take place. So it will affect the conservation of soil as well as the conservation of water. So first objective of this watershed management is to control the runoff, which can cause damage to the entire area. Okay. The second objective of this watershed management is to manage and utilize the runoff water for useful purpose. Okay. Third objective, to protect and conserve and improve the land of watershed for more efficient and sustained production. Okay. Also, it helps to protect and enhance the water resources originating in the watershed. Also, it can help to check erosion, soil erosion, and to reduce the effect of sediment yield in the watershed. It helps to rehabilitate the deteriorating land. Okay, if soil erosion will take place, then land will be deteriorated, land will be damaged. So it helps to rehabilitate that deteriorated land. Okay. Also, it helps to moderate the flood peaks at downstream areas. Okay. Also, it helps to increase the infiltration of rainwater. to improve and increase the production of timber, fodder, and livestock resources. Okay, if you conserve the water, if you conserve the soil, then ultimately the vegetation will be grown, and production of timber, fodder, and livestock resources will increase. Okay, to enhance the groundwater recharge. Okay, it reduce the runoff, so it will enhance the groundwater recharge. So these are the objective of the watershed management. Now we will see the classification of watershed. The watershed is classified on the basis of size as well as on the basis of land use. Okay, on the basis of size, the watershed is classified into three types. First one is a small watershed, second one is medium watershed, and third one is large watershed. Okay. On the basis of land use, the watershed is classified into different types, like mountainous watershed, in which mountain is predominant, the agricultural watershed, in which agriculture activity is predominant, the desert watershed, in which no vegetation or little vegetation is there in that area, then it is termed as a desert watershed. So on the basis of land use, the watershed is also classified. Okay, so the main classification of watershed is discussed broadly on the basis of size as well as on the basis of land use. Two watersheds of the same size may behave very differently if they do not have similar land and channel fields. Okay, so on the basis of size, the watershed is classified into three types. First one is the small watershed, in which the area of watershed is less than 250 kilometers square. The medium watershed, in which the area will be more than 250 kilometers square but less than 2500 kilometers square, that is termed as a medium watershed. Large watershed, the area of this type of watershed is more than 2500 kilometers square. So on the basis of area, this watershed is classified. Okay, so a small watershed, what is the characteristics of a small watershed? First, the area is less than 250 kilometers square, and also in this type of watershed, in the small watershed, the overland flow and land phase are dominant. Okay, channel phase is relatively less dominant, but overland flow and land phase is dominant. Okay, so in this type of watershed, the watershed is highly sensitive to high intensity and short duration rainfall. If there is a heavy rainfall, uh, then what happens? Suddenly the floods will come in this type of watershed. So this type of watershed is highly sensitive to the high intensity rainfall. Okay. The second type of watershed is a medium watershed. The characteristics of this medium watershed is that its area lies between 250 kilometers square to 2500 kilometers square. So in this type of watershed, the work ability in this watershed are easy due to accessibility approach. Okay, so here the shape of the watershed play a dominant role. In this case, the overland flow and land phase are dominant. Okay, channel phase is not so much dominant, but overland flow and land phase is dominant. Now, the third type of watershed on the basis of size is large watershed. So, large watershed is that watershed in which area of that land is more than 2,500 kilometers square. Okay, the characteristics of this type of watershed is these watersheds are less sensitive to high intensity rainfall of short duration. Okay, if there is a high intensity of rainfall in that area, so it is not so much affected by the flood. Okay, it is less sensitive to high intensity rainfall. Okay, the channel network and channel phase are well developed, and thus channel storage is dominant. In this case, the channel storage is dominant, but in other two types, the channel phase is not so much dominant. Okay, so these are the types of watershed on the basis of size. Okay, now now we will discuss the type of watershed on the basis of land use. Okay. So on the basis of land use, the watershed is classified as a agricultural watershed, urban watershed, mountainous watershed, forest watershed, desert watershed, coastal or marshy watershed, and mixed watershed. Mixed watershed means combination of above two, any two watershed, any two or two, more than two watershed. Okay. So here in this case, the land use define the exploitation. This exploitation may be by natural or may be by the human interaction. Okay. So in this type of watershed, the characteristics of watershed which affect the various hydrological process within the watershed. Okay. So these are the types of the watershed: agricultural, urban, mountainous, forest, desert, coastal, okay, and mixed watershed. So first one is the agricultural watershed. The name is the agriculture. So obviously the agriculture activity will be more dominant in this type of watershed. Okay. So here in the agricultural watershed is the watershed in which the agricultural activities is dominant. Okay. It experienced perhaps the most dynamically significant land use change. This usually leads to increased infiltration, increased erosion, or decreased runoff. Okay. Depression storage is also increased by agricultural operation. When the fields are barren, means there is no any vegetation, then in that condition, the falling raindrops tend to compact the soil and infiltration is reduced. Okay. So there is a lesser development of a stream in agricultural watershed. The small channels formed by the erosion and runoff in this area are obliterated by the tillage operation. The soil structure is altered by regular application of organic as well as the inorganic manures. Thus, it leads to change in filtration characteristics. Okay, so this is the agriculture watershed. The agriculture activity is more dominant in this type of watershed. Okay. Now, second is urban watershed. Okay. So, urban watershed means in which the building, road, a street, pavement, and parking lots, this type of construction will be more dominant. Okay, agricultural land will be less. Okay, so these are the watershed area having maximum manipulation for the convenience of human beings. Okay, so for the convenience of human beings, the building will be made, the road will be made for the convenience, a street will be developed, pavement will be made, parking will be made. Okay, so this type of construction you can see in this type of watershed. Okay, so these features reduce the infiltrating land area, because if you make the pavement, if you make the road, then ultimately the soil will be reduced. So what happens? The infiltration will be reduced. Okay, so these features, this is like building, road, street, pavement, and parking lot. These features reduce the infiltrating land area and increase imperviousness. Okay, so imperviousness, if it is increased, then what happens? runoff will be increased. If there is a high rainfall, then runoff will be increased and flooding will come frequently. Okay. So as drainage system are artificially built, the natural pattern of water flow is substantially altered. For a given rainfall event, interception and depression storage can be significant, but infiltration is considerably reduced. So as a result, there is pronounced increase in runoff and pronounced decrease in the soil erosion. Okay, thus an urban watershed is more vulnerable to the flooding if the drainage system is not adequate. Okay, so this is the urban watershed. So what is the main point here? In the urban watershed, the agriculture land will be less. Okay, there will be more construction of building, road, a street, pavement, and parking lot. So this construction is developed for the convenience of human beings. Okay, so if you develop these types of construction in an area, then what happens? The uh, the infiltration of land area will be reduced. If the infiltration of land area is reduced, and if there is not adequate drainage construction, then what happens? If there is a rainfall, then suddenly the flood will come and damage your watershed. Okay, so this is the urban watershed. Now, the other type of watershed is mountainous watershed. Okay, so what is the mountainous watershed? We have seen agricultural watershed in which agriculture activity will be dominant. We have seen the urban watershed in which urban activities will be more dominant, like construction of building, road, street, pavement, etc., etc. Now, this is the mountainous watershed. So, what will be there? Here, the more the agriculture land will be less, but more mountainous mountain will be there. Okay. So, because of the higher altitude, because of higher altitude, such watershed receive considerable snowfall. Because if the altitude is high, then at the high altitude, the rainfall, uh, the snowfall will be more. Okay. So due to a steep gradient and a relatively less porous soil, the infiltration is less and surface runoff is will be dominant. Okay. So the area downstream of the mountainous are vulnerable to the flooding. Okay, so due to the snow melt, water yield is significant even during a spring and summer season. Okay, so this is the mountainous area. So in the mountainous area, since there is a mountain will be there, so in that area, there will be sometimes the snowfall will be there. At a high altitude, generally snowfall is there. Okay, so if a snowfall will be there, and this mountainous area is less porous. Okay, so if there is a snowfall, if so water will due to the steep gradient, the water flow along the mountainous and infiltration is low. So at the downstream area, flooding will be occur. Okay, so in this mountainous watershed, the surface runoff is more dominant, and flooding, and this area is more vulnerable to the flooding. Okay, so this is the mountainous watershed. Now, other type of watershed is forest watershed. Okay, so we have seen agricultural watershed, agriculture will be dominant. Urban watershed, the urban activities will be dominant, more building, road, street, pavement, parking lot, you will see in this type of watershed. In the mountainous watershed, mountain is there, more area is occupied by the mountain. So if mountain is of high altitude, so there will be a snowfall. If a snowfall is there, then the this area is more vulnerable for the flooding. Okay. Now the fourth type of watershed is forest watershed. So what is the forest watershed? So obviously in this type of watershed, the forest area will be more. It is more dominant. Okay, forest will be more dominant in this type of area. So here these are the watershed where natural forest cover dominates other land use. Okay, in this watershed, interception is significant, and evapotranspiration is a dominant component of the hydrological cycle. Okay, the ground is usually littered with leaves because forest is there, so ground will be always covered with the leaves, stem, branches, wood, etc. Okay, so what happens when it rains? The water is held by the trees. Okay, and the ground cover provides greater opportunity to infiltrate because on the ground for what is there, different vegetation is there, leaves is there, stem is there, branches is there, wood is there. So when there will be rainfall, then that rainfall uh, will start to infiltrate into that area. Okay, so the subsurface flow becomes more dominant, and there are times when there is little to no surface runoff. Okay, because more vegetation is there. I know if there is more vegetation, then infiltration area of that infiltration rate of in that area will be more. Okay, so the subsurface flow becomes dominant, and there are times when there is little to no surface runoff because forest resist flow of overland water. The peak discharge is reduced. Okay, so flooding will not occur in this type of watershed. So complete deforestation and increased annual water yield by 20 to 40% in this type of watershed. Okay, so this is the forest watershed. Now, other type of watershed is desert watershed. Okay. So we have seen agricultural watershed. Agriculture is dominant. Urban watershed, different types of structure is made for the convenience of the human being. So that is the a street, a road, building, apartment. Likewise, that is the urban watershed. Also, we have seen the mountainous watershed, in which mountain is more dominant. Okay, if mountain is there, then this mountain will be at the high altitude. Okay, so there will be frequently a snowfall in that area. So if a snowfall is there and on the mountain there is a less soil, so what happens? There will be more runoff. Okay, so if there will be more runoff, then at the downstream area, the uh, chance of flooding will be more. Okay. Also, we have seen the forest watershed in which the more vegetation is there. Okay, on the ground you can see the leaf, root, stem, etc. So when there will be rainfall, then all that rainfall will be absorbed by uh, that vegetation, and in this way it will increase the infiltration rate of the soil. Okay, now this is the desert area, desert watershed. So what is the desert watershed? So in the desert watershed there is little to virtually no vegetation in desert watershed. Okay, the soil is mostly sandy soil will be there, and little annual rainfall occurs. Okay, rainfall will be very, very, very less. Soil will be mostly sandy. Okay, vegetation will be very, very less. And if rainfall is not there, then what happens? The stream development will be less, minimal. Okay, so whenever there is rainfall, most of the rainfall is absorbed by the porous soil. Porous soil means sandy soil. Okay, some of the water will evaporate. 1 minute. Okay. So some of the water will evaporate, and the remaining runoff uh, only to be soaked in during its journey. Okay, so there is limited groundwater recharge due to the occurrence of less rainfall in this type of watershed. Okay, so this is the desert watershed. So what is the main point in the desert watershed? Vegetation will be very very less. The soil, sandy soil will be there. Rainfall is very very less. So if there is less rainfall, then what happens? The stream development will be minimal. Okay, and if there is rainfall, then since here the temperature will be more, so uh, some water will be evaporate, some water will soaked during the runoff. Okay, so you can say if there is a little groundwater recharge also. Okay, so if there is a little groundwater recharge, then water level in the our aquifer will be very very less. Okay, now other type is the coastal watershed. So coastal watershed, the watershed in the coastal area may partly be urban or and are in dynamic contact with the sea. Okay, so their hydrology is considerably influenced by backwater from wave and tidal action of the sea. So usually these watersheds receive high rainfall, mostly of cyclonic type, and this type of watershed do not have channel control in flow and are most vulnerable to severe local flooding. Okay. So in this type of watershed, the water table is very high, and also salt water intrusion threatens the health of the coastal aquifer. Okay, and usually these are a source of the fresh water supply. Okay. So this is the coastal watershed. Now, other type of watershed is marshy or wetland watershed. So, what is the marshy or wetland watershed? So, in this type of watershed, the land are almost flat, and this land are comprised of swamps, marsh, water courses, etc. Okay. So, in this type of watershed, in the marshy watershed, the there will be rich wildlife and there will be plenty of vegetation. Okay, since here more rainfall is there, more water is there, so the water is not a limiting factor to satisfy evaporative demand. Evaporation is more dominant. So rainfall is normally high and infiltration is minimal. Most of the rainfall becomes runoff. Okay, the flood hydrograph peaks gradually and last for a long time. Okay, so this is the marshy or wetland watershed. Now the other types of watershed is mixed watershed. Okay, so mixed watershed means in this type of watershed there will be uh, a mixture of two watershed or more than mixture of more than two watershed. Okay, like in the mixed watershed, desert watershed as well as marshy watershed. These two combination will be there. The agriculture watershed and um, mountainous watershed may be there. Okay, so there will be the combination of two watershed, two or more watershed. That is the mixed watershed. Okay, and in the India generally the mixed watershed is found. Okay, so these are the watershed where multiple land use or land cover exists, either because of the natural setting or due to a combination of natural and human interaction activities. So in this watershed, a combination of two or more of the previous classification occurs, and none of the single characteristics dominate the area. Okay. In India, the most of the watershed are of mixed nature of characteristics, where agriculture, forest, settlement, etc., land use occurs. So in India, most of the watershed is the mixed watershed. Okay. So this is all about the today's lecture. Here in this lecture, we have seen what do you mean by the watershed. Okay. Watershed means this is an area where all the runoff water will collect at a single point. Okay, so if we collect all the water at a single point, then you can develop the uh, all the things near that single point. Okay, so this is the, and also we have seen the different scope of the watershed management, and we have seen the objective of watershed management also. Okay, also we have seen the classification of watershed. Different types of watershed are there on the basis of size and as well as on the basis of land use. Okay, so on the basis of size, the watershed is classified into three types. That is the small watershed, medium watershed, and large watershed. Okay, so you have to remember this size area of the watershed. A small watershed less than 250 kilometers square, likewise. Okay. Also, we have seen the different types of watershed on the basis of land use. Okay. So, for on the basis of land use, what are the different types of watershed? Agricultural watershed, urban watershed, mountainous watershed, forest watershed, desert watershed, coastal watershed, and mixed watershed. Okay. So, on the basis of this lecture, um, they, you can solve some quiz related to this. Okay. So this is the quiz you can solve. This quiz is based on this lecture only. So first question is fill in the blanks question. Okay. So first question. Uh, yes, one mistake is there. Okay. The question is which type of watershed is called what is called the drainage basin or catchment area? It is defined as an area in which all water flowing into it and goes to a common point. So what will be there here? Okay, there will be a watershed. Okay, so water shade. Okay, so watershed is the correct answer. Here you can see watershed. Okay. So a watershed, also called a drainage basin or catchment area, and it is defined as an area in which all water flowing into it and goes to a common point. The second question is that fill in the blank. Dash dash is the a study of the relevant characteristics of a watershed aimed at the sustainable distribution of its resources. Okay, so which study? What is called? This is watershed management. Here we have seen this one. This question. Okay, so here the answer will be watershed management. Watershed management. Management. Okay. The third question is that the blank watershed is highly sensitive to high intensity and short duration rainfall. So which watershed? Small watershed, medium watershed, or high watershed? Which watershed is more sensitive to rainfall? So obviously we have seen in the small watershed the area is less than 250 kilometers square. So if there is a heavy rainfall, then suddenly the flood will come. So the correct answer is a small watershed. A small watershed. Okay. Okay. The other question is the size of a small watershed is कितना होता है? Less than 300 kilometers square, less than 2,500 kilometers square, less than 500 kilometers square, or less than 250 kilometers square. A small watershed. So correct is 250 kilometers square. This one. Okay. The other question is the size of large watershed is. What is the size of large watershed? The size of large watershed. What will be the size of large watershed is more than 2,500 kilometers square. If this there is if the size of watershed is less than 250 kilometers square, then it is a small watershed. If the size is more than 2,500 kilometers square, then it is the large watershed. And if the size is more than 250 but less than 2,500 kilometers square, then it is the medium watershed. Okay. So here correct answer is 2,000, more than 2,500 kilometers square. The sixth question is the blank watershed are less sensitive to high intensity rainfall of short duration. Which watershed? A small watershed, medium watershed, or high watershed? Which watershed is less sensitive? Okay, less sensitive means if there is a high intensity rainfall, then there will be not so much flooding occur. Okay, so correct answer is a small method. A small is the very high sensitive, so correct is the high watershed. Or medium high watershed. No, here will be the large watershed. Okay, so this one will be the large watershed. So large watershed are less sensitive. Okay. Now, the seventh question is the size of medium watershed lies between कितना से होता है 250 to 2,500 kilometer square. This is the correct answer. Okay. If it is less than 250, then it is a small watershed. If it is more than 2,500 kilometers square, then it is a large watershed. And if the area is between these two, then it is medium watershed. Okay. Now in India, the most of the watershed are, we have seen many types of watershed like agricultural watershed, urban watershed, mixed watershed, desert watershed. Okay, so in India, which type of watershed is found mostly? So we have seen in the slide that most of the watershed are mixed type of watershed. Mixed type of watershed means the combination of more than two watersheds, like a combination of agricultural and urban watershed. Okay, so this comes under the mixed watershed. So in India, this type of watershed is mostly found. Now, here are some descriptive type question you have to attempt. What is the watershed? Watershed means watershed is nothing but it is an area in which all the runoff water collect at a single point. Okay, and what are the objective of watershed management? Okay, so there various scope of this watershed management. It can reduce the runoff, increase the infiltration. Okay, many advantages are many objectives are there. You can refer the slide and you can write this question. Write down objective of watershed management. Also, explain the classification of watershed based on the size. Yes, on the base of the size, what is the classification? A small watershed, large, medium watershed, and large watershed. Also, you have to classify of watershed based on land use. So, on the basis of land use, other type of watershed are there like uh, agricultural watershed, mountainous watershed, urban watershed, desert watershed, coastal watershed. Okay, so this type of these are the types of watershed on the basis of land use. Okay, so okay, so this is all about the today's lecture. in the next lecture, we will see the different characteristics of watershed. Okay, so this is all about for today's lecture.